Number 1. Thumbnail art. Gardening is an art. Some people do it very well. I don't. I can grow prize-winning weeds and that's all. Not even the good kind. Tumbleweeds and thorny things. No special care needed, and they take over the whole yard overnight. This house had been vacant a year when I bought it. The yard was a jungle. I'm still working on it. I'm limited when I can be outside because I'm allergic to the sun. I have something called xeroderma pigmentosum. I work outside before daylight or after dark. The rising sun chases me in before it comes over the mountain. The county I live in recently made a law about no junk or debris in the yard, or they give a no warning $300 fine, plus court hearing and court costs. No mercy. The cops in this bumpkin town hate me because of a mountain lion I met right after moving here. They've had an attitude ever since. They'd love to fine me $300. It would make their day. They also drive by every morning while trolling and patrolling and see me with yard tools and trash bags and get a good moon view as I'm bent over working when they drive by. They can see I'm working on it. Lucky so far, no ticket. We got an amazing rainstorm. Rare for these parts, I was thrilled. We need rain. The weeds were thrilled, too, and grew like weeds. Some were as tall as I am and out of control. My clippers, shears, axes, mini saws weren't keeping up with the crazy growth, so I went to the hardware store and got a machete. Heavy duty, black handle, long, shiny, sharp blade. Yep, that will get the job done in record time. I woke up before the rooster, ready to work. I was in a good mood because I was expecting great progress in this weed nightmare. I grabbed extra bags on the way out the door, expecting to fill them. My old machete was dull, chipped, rusty, and now I had a new one. It was light enough to see what I was doing, so I started chopping down weeds. Cool tool. Nice slice. The sun would give me about 15 more minutes to work, and I had 6 bags filled, a record for daytime. I had a rhythm going. Grab, chop, bend in half, stuff in the bag, and next. I could stuff a bag so it began to burst, and drag it out to the growing stack next to the trash can in about 10 minutes. The rhyme went well with the rhythm. Write your ticket, take your ticket, shove it up your ass. I smiled bigger every time I dragged out another one. I hefted the next bag onto the pile and chuckled, "That's a weed owner power move." That's when I should have quit for the day. I was on the final bag of the morning, working and calculating when the whole yard would be perfectly done. I was fixing to end my work session, feeling like I accomplished something huge and proud of it. I was also disgusted with myself for not getting a better tool long ago, but I was taught a reminder by my mom when I was little that went something like this: use it up, make it do, wear it out, or do without. I had plenty of tools, and it seemed a waste to get a new one, even though these were over 30 years old, passed down to me. I was glad I invested in my new yard buddy. It saved so much time and energy. That's the last thought my pea-brain had before I felt a tap across the top of my thumb. If you are squeamish, this is a good time for a fridge raid, popcorn refill, or potty break. The tap I barely noticed wasn't a weed, dirt, or grass landing on me. I folded my handful of cut weeds and crammed them into the bag, about to grab the next bunch, when I saw the bag was covered in red stuff. My first thought was, "Oh my god, I just killed a critter hiding in the weeds." I hope it wasn't one of the stray cats that used my yard for a safe haven. I spread out the weeds where I was working to look for an injured animal, and felt my other hand was wet and cold. It wasn't something I could ignore and keep working. I went in to do first aid on myself. I tried pressure and other things, but nothing slowed it down. I had to hunt through boxes not yet unpacked to find the serious medical kit. I'm leaking all over the place. I put a tourniquet on and wrapped it in a half roll of paper towels that soaked through before I found my keys. I had to use my index finger and my birdie finger to hold my thumb together. I shoved the whole mess into a Walmart bag and drove to the clinic. I have a stick-shift car. It doesn't have power steering either. Operating my car opposite-handed and having let go of the wheel to shift was awkward. I was doing my best not to make a mess of my car. The dumbest thought ran through my empty head while driving. Lizzie Borden. I laughed at myself. I didn't laugh long. The doctor said I had to clean it out and stitch it. Sounds simple. It wasn't. There were bone fragments, and if they'd known, I would have been sent elsewhere. I did major damage. Nerves, tendons, veins were severed. I was stitched inside, and a big ugly row of Frankenstitches across the top. I was glad to be home, until I saw the mess. If the cops ever luminol my house, they'll swear a murder happened, and the body was dragged through the house. Over 80 drops and a few puddles where I stood still. The cats were active while I was gone, paw prints and smears. I cleaned the cats and floors and everything else, and by then I was worn out. I ended that gruesome day feeling glad. I made noticeable yard progress and watched a Bigfoot movie with the cats. Friday the 13th is always a lucky day for me. The outside stitches were taken out today. I felt nothing as they were stretched out, clipped, and pulled one by one. I felt nothing when they were put in either. Zero pain since it happened. I expected to be miserable for days. I'd forget about it. I now have a cast that goes nearly to my elbow from my thumb, and a referral to go to a hand surgeon. I'll go back in 2 weeks for a follow-up to see if the circulation is good. The bone will fill in and reconnect. If it can't get good circulation, I'll have another problem. I could solve it in one whack. I'll have some adjustments in the future if this doesn't improve. I can't turn the car keys in the door or ignition, write with a pen, use scissors. Well, maybe I shouldn't play with scissors. I can still spin on the steer wheel. That's a relief. But no more upside-down tricks if my thumb is dead. Maybe I could tape it to my finger so I don't roll over it. I live to spin and love it. It's also a good side hustle for me for extra cash. I'm thinking of getting a riding lawnmower. What do y'all think? Number 2. In the corner. I woke with a start. My little gray tabby kitten, Thomasina, unfurled herself from my arm and moved to my pillow. I heard the noise from what sounded like the living room. I rose to my elbow and leaned to raise my head higher and cock my head toward where I thought the sound was coming from. Again I heard, but still couldn't tell what it was. The air seemed thick and hung heavily around me. Seeing Thomasina slipping back into her cat sleep, purring softly, I rose and looked around, the best that I could, through the inky darkness of the once still household. Lethargically, I rose to my feet, unsure of my direction, and caught sight of the open bedroom door just off the foot of the bed. The air felt particularly sticky and thick, like in a dream. Fighting the torpor, I told myself, "You are in no dream." Moving methodically towards the open door that led to the hallway, giving one more passing touch to Thomasina. To calm her, I told myself. To calm me, more like. I moved across the carpeted floor, careful not to trip over Thomasina's toys. Finally, I made it to the doorway. It felt like an eternity. As I stopped just outside the door, I caught a momentary glimpse and realized I was standing in front of a full-length mirror mounted on the outside of the closed bathroom door. At first I thought it was my reflection, but then it happened again. I saw something move out of the corner of my left eye, my head turning reflexively towards that movement. Stifling my fear, I felt my heart beating so hard, it was as if my body was moving of its own accord. Silently, I whispered Christ's name, 3 times under my breath in rapid succession. A scream rose in my throat as I saw the thing staring back at me from the mirror. I felt an utterly helpless terror as it swiftly moved up my body, almost lifting me off the floor in its wake. In an instant, it all subsided, as did the scream that hovered in the back of my throat, when upon blinking and then blinking again, I realized that the hideous thing was my own image, distorted back to me from the old warped and cracked mirror. It took me some minutes before I was able to calm myself, enough to examine the distortion the old mirror made of my appearance. I almost laughed out loud until my revelry was shattered. Like the mirror, shards of laughter stuck in my throat, when from behind me down the hall and in the living room came the sound of the key cover to the piano being raised, as if someone might be sitting down to play. Whirling around in the direction of the sound to peer into the darkness, I could just see the outline of the front door and the door frame that led to my parents' bedroom on the right. There was a short connecting hall between the bedroom and the main hall that led out into the living room, the foyer, and the front door. The sound that came was like someone jabbing the keys, uncertain how to play. The only thing that came out was a bizarrely random, discordant jumble, like a cat would make walking across the keys. Cautiously, I moved to where the sound emanated. I was not exactly thinking about what I was doing, or what I would do if I saw something as I imagined in the mirror, but I was determined to find out. It was just the Sherlock Holmes in me, I told myself, or sheer foolishness, but I had to know. My nerves were on edge and my breathing had become labored, like walking up a steep hill. Trying to move and breathe in this air was what I imagined it would be like swimming through quicksand. I knew my footsteps were less quiet and unsteady, but for some reason I didn't care. I still had to find out why. Moving closer to the bedroom was the corner. Suddenly something inside me screamed, "Go back! Stop!" But it was drowned out by my determination to go on. My curiosity overwhelmed even the warning inside my thoughts. There has to be a reason. As I moved through the velvet gloom that enveloped my soul, mind, and body, the fathomless darkness surrounded me and moved over me, sliding through every nook and cranny of my body. It was as if I was being assaulted and caressed at the same time. Cautiously, I stopped for a moment to look around the corner and into the living room. The moment I turned to look, I suddenly realized my mistake. As I turned, something jerked me backwards so suddenly and so quickly that I was slammed into the corner between both walls. My breath was forced out of my open mouth, and a gasping groan escaped my throat. Whatever the unseen thing was, it was not yet finished with me. Pinned, I was suddenly and violently jerked upwards toward the ceiling, hitting the back of my head hard, and then as a scream caught in my throat again, echoing in the surrounding darkness, I was viciously shaken. I was so terrified, I could do nothing. The shaking became so violent my teeth rattled and my arms and legs contorted in all directions. Something unseen had grabbed me by the back of my neck, and no matter how hard I fought, refused to let go. Finally exhausted, with my arms and legs hanging, I felt like a drunken and deranged puppet with some malevolent force as a puppeteer. I don't know what happened after that, except I awoke crying, tears streaming down my face. My little Thomasina still asleep on my pillow. It scared me so bad that I thought my heart would stop, until she started to lick away my tears to comfort me. It was then that I realized I was still in my bed and had nothing to fear. I wasn't even in the same house anymore. I petted my kitten and lay there awake for some time pondering, as my little gray tabby settled herself again on my chest. I realized that she must have moved while I was in the nightmare. As I was falling into a restful slumber, I heard a noise that aroused my curiosity, and I woke with a start. My little gray tabby kitten, Thomasina, unfurled herself from my arm and moved to my pillow. Number 3. From the Edge. When I awoke, the acrid smell of human blood was so strong, it nearly made me vomit. I had eaten my last supper with the expectation that it would be my last, so I ate my fill and relished every bite. What I didn't count on was the closer I got to death, the more painful it became. It felt like I was being eaten alive from the inside out. The pain I'd endured from a nightmare childhood of beatings, nocturnal enuresis, night terrors, and sexual, physical, mental, and emotional abuse almost seemed pleasant by comparison. Wasn't that what this was for? I asked the powers that be. To end the pain once and for all? I was barely 24 years old when I asked that question. I felt like 100. The last and final cut to both arms laid me so low that the last thing I remember was my forehead touching the blood-soaked carpet just before I passed out. Next thing I remember, I was walking in the dark. There were no stars and no moon, not even clouds to reflect the light, yet somehow I was able to walk without tripping. I could tell the terrain was earthen because I'd walked at night alone many times, so I didn't consider this much different. Not at first. I could just see a faint red glow off to my right, so I instinctively made for it. I had always enjoyed being able to see in the dark, not actually seeing, but imagining where objects were and avoiding them at the last second. When in that state, I saw objects as dark red and staticky like a TV when it's off the air. An object in front of me will suddenly appear from the black, becoming visible at the last second. It was never a matter of speed, like slowing down so I couldn't run into things. It was more about the ability to not allow other thoughts, especially fear, to distract my attention. The closer I got to the red glow, the more the angle of the terrain changed. It felt as though I was walking uphill. The exertion of the ascent made it feel as though I was pushing against an invisible force. I was relieved when the gnawing pain in my stomach eased. It eased enough to allow me, despite the resistance, to continue on. How long I walked or how far I didn't know. I was like a moth drawn to a flame. As I got closer, the ascent increased, exceeding my peripheral vision. Often I had to turn my head 90 degrees or more to take in its length. Eventually I found myself completely surrounded in all directions. "Which way?" I asked the black. "Straight ahead," it answered. I don't know what happened or how I found myself suddenly on the edge of a vast cliff, looking down into a deep crevasse, filled with billions upon billions of blood-red lights. I only remember how it felt when I first hung my head over the edge to look down and take it all in. It felt like a wave upon wave of all the things you remembered that made you sick or made you afraid, like one of my night terrors, complete with accelerated heartbeat, profuse sweating, hyperventilation, muscle spasms, and pleadings for a mother that wasn't there. It felt like a recurring dream I'd had about waking up to discover I'd been buried alive. The sound rising was how our golden retriever sounded back when I was a kid, before my older brother shot her in the head after someone laced her food with iron fillings. The long, loud howling, crying, and pleading nearly drove us all mad with grief. My younger brother cried for almost 2 days. My mother had a licensed hypnotherapist put me under once to find out why I was the way I was. She didn't like the result, so she never hired him back. After the first session, he said I sounded like an animal, moaning, growling, roaring, weeping, wild-eyed and frantic, as though being chased or confronting something so terrible it was impossible for me to put into words. He asked me over and over to describe what I dreamt, but I wouldn't tell him, or I'd lie and say I didn't remember. When I was growing up, there were, like most kids, many adults in my life. So much of the abuse I remembered and felt came at the hands of teachers, ministers, coaches, next-door neighbors, kids at home and kids at school, and sometimes complete strangers. When I tried to tell what happened, I wasn't believed, or I was told I was a liar or a troublemaker. So after being beaten or grounded or punished in any of a number of ways, I finally stopped telling anyone, even my younger brother. because I either couldn't or wouldn't describe the things that happened to me. No one knew, but I knew. Some still did. Because it wasn't meant for anyone else, I told myself back then, and for years after. Besides, describing it might make it spread to others, innocent others, like my younger brother, whom I swore to protect. It wasn't meant for them any more than it was meant for me. It was meant for me, I'd rage. It was my punishment, my horror, my terror. But why, and for what? My mother was raised Catholic. She attended Catholic schools. She was born 5 years before the Great Depression. Some of the best years of my life, she'd say, and would, at the age of 5, lose it all, and did, for the rest of her young life until she married her first husband. When he died on the beaches of Normandy, it very nearly destroyed her. My older brother said, "It took a piece out of her, that's for sure." Before I was born, she'd been in labor for 40 hours, or so I was told, and very nearly died from blood loss. For some reason, she blamed me for that, and everything wrong in her life, even the things that happened before I was born. My brother and I called her Morgan Le Fay, after King Arthur's strange half-sister, who drugged Arthur before he was king, slept with him, and had 3 sons by him. The one who told her eldest son, Mordred, to kill his own father. They ended up either killing themselves or, as in the case of Mordred, began a decades-long, protracted war whereby almost all the knights of the Round Table were killed, and he was killed by his own father, but not before Arthur was mortally wounded by his own son and died shortly thereafter. I never knew my father. I've never even seen a picture of him, but I heard my mother's version of what he was to her, and what that meant for me. She saw me as she saw him, and did what she could to convince everyone around her, especially my brother, like Morgan Le Fay, that I was evil and possessed. "You are the devil," she'd rave. "You are the devil's spawn. You will never come to any good. You will always be a failure, and you will one day either die by your own hand, or kill someone and die in the electric chair, or in prison, just like your grandfather." Her father, who eventually died in prison for murder. And there I was looking down at where I would end up if... when I awoke again, I was so weak and so cold I could hardly move. The blood had dried, sticking my forehead and nose and parts of the side of my cheek to the carpet. To get free, I left pieces of skin and hair stuck to the floor. Somehow I managed to crawl from the edge of my hands and my knees, still seeing the billions upon billions of blood-red lights staring back at me, and only after realizing that I had pissed and shat myself and otherwise wasted my final meal. Between passing out and reawakening again and again, I managed to fill the bathtub, shed my soiled clothing, and pull myself up and into the steaming hot water. Just before I passed out again, I turned it off, despite the pots and pans of coagulated blood strewn throughout my bedroom. I didn't want to flood the house. When I woke, the water was cold and I was freezing. In between passing out and crawling to the hall closet, I managed to get some blankets and towels, and just before 1 a.m., I woke up long enough to drag myself back into the kitchen and call 911. I spent the last 8 hours of my life trying to end it. It had all begun when I announced to God, Christ, and the powers that be, in a clear, loud voice that, "I've had enough. I can't take it anymore. You can have this life back. I quit." It was December, and one of the coldest winters we'd ever had. But that morning at 2:02 a.m., the sky was clear, and there was a late full moon rising in the east, making the snow glow and the stars shine like I had never seen before. A crowd had gathered outside. Many were neighbors, some were complete strangers, and they were wheeling me along in the gurney and into the back of the ambulance. I saw the looks of sympathy and hate, contempt and hope. Some seemed happy, strangely, and some indifferent, as though they'd seen this so many times before it was boring. I marveled at human nature and wondered about the ones I knew. Who were they, really? And the ones I didn't. I wondered who they were, and why they were there. They were the indifferent ones. On the way to the hospital, I was pronounced DOA, dead on arrival. I woke up in a room with a nurse standing over me crying and telling me that I was a fool, and that if she had a choice, she would have let me die. She told me that the ambulance should have had flat tires, because I would have been better off dead. She must have thought I was catatonic or brain dead because I wouldn't move a muscle, but deep down inside I was laughing. Not at her, not at them, but at me. All of it, everything. The years of pain and suffering I had endured for so long, the sheer weight of the guilt and anger and fear that had accumulated since I was a child was gone. I saw a part of me float to the ceiling, and I saw another looking down and out at the world, and it was beautiful. What I lost was the old me, the part that was killing me, and probably would have killed somebody else eventually, just like my mother said. But what I gained would only be revealed later and over many years, many of which I had described before in other stories. What she didn't know then, but would find out later before she died, was that her son, from her third marriage, my brother, just like my grandfather, was the one that ended up in prison for murder and will eventually die there, just like her father. I protected him from everything else, but I never imagined I'd have to protect him from her. Looking back, it was as if the first 24 years of my life had been lived by another person. I can only barely imagine that person now, who he was and what he was like. Today that poor, tortured soul, along with his poor, tortured mother, are gone, and the most important revelation I learned was, it was never really about me, after all. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please feel free to click the subscribe button and bell below, or click the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment, and share this video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.